Welcome, wandering souls and lost sailors, to the Ship of the Dead podcast.
Ahoy! I'm Luke Stratton, the creator of Pirate Borg. Welcome to my first panel on the Dark Caribbean with a focus on world building. This is going to be a little bit interactive, I think, because I'm just going to talk for an hour about what I've been working on and kind of maybe how that can help you build your own world. I think that's probably why most of you guys are here. Let's start with what I'm hoping to accomplish here, okay? I'm going to show you what I'm working on and hopefully give you guys some tips and tricks for working on your own settings. Let's talk about what the Dark Caribbean is. So the Dark Caribbean right now in its main format is like a 300-page A5 setting book for Pirate Borg. This started as like a 5th edition thing, and then I ended up making Pirate Borg almost on accident, and then that did really well, and then I put some setting from the Dark Caribbean in Pirate Borg, and then ultimately now they're kind of married. They're kind of the same thing. But we're also planning a 300-page plus book for 5th edition, as well as an adaptation of Pirate Borg for 5th edition, which will basically be all the stuff that's out right now, like in the form of the 5e Bestiary and Limithron's Guide to Naval Combat, but reformatted, and then we're going to convert the player classes to 5th edition as well. So the idea here is that while I think Pirate Borg and Mork Borg and the OSR is the best way to play in this setting, I'm not like gatekeepy about it. I want people to enjoy it however they want. I like to think of it as like Pirate Borg is like you're playing as Barbossa and his crew, and there's a good chance you're going to get killed really quickly, or you're a terrible person. But if you're going to play 5e, you're probably playing more like Jack Sparrow and Elizabeth Swann, or maybe like Earl Flynn. It'll be a little harder to die. I mean, you can imagine a level 15 5e pirate is going to be quite a force to reckon with, you know. Right now, the plan is to kickstart sometime next year. But after this one that just finished this on Friday, I'm not making any promises, and we're just going to go to Kickstarter when it's ready. That being said, the whole thing is getting released on Patreon if you're interested in participating in the process. But content-wise, which is the exciting part, Dark Caribbean is going to be 6 major factions and forces, plus 5 or more minor factions. This includes faction quests, reputation tracking, basically like everything you need to run a sandbox-style, very OSR-driven campaign. There are going to be at least 50 islands with maps and what's happening tables and all that kind of fun stuff on how, so you can run it when your players just kind of show up with generators and tables. And 20 plus ports. Some of these I already have done. I've got most of Port Royal done. Nassau Town's done. Tortuga is done. Those are going to be kind of like a combination of one-page dungeons mixed with, you know, city maps and then lots of tables to roll what's going on there. One of the focuses of this project is going to be able to run it without having read it. The idea will be pick it up, pick something that you want to do, roll some dice, and the book will do the lifting. Almost like, I hate to use the word AI, but like an older school AI generator might like decide for you what is going on. This book will be able to use that way. So you don't have to read it like you would a normal RPG book from cover to cover. Okay, so more content, random generators. You might have seen some of these already, but these are going to be like kits. So you can roll up your own ports, for example. So like, oh, hey, I need a pirate port and I want to like show off the ash den that's in town, or like what's happening on the docks, but you don't want to use like one of the major ones. You just need like a place to refuel between adventures. This kind of takes the place of like your standard old school, there's a town and there's gold in their dungeon. Well, this is the town half of that, right? Also, there's a pretty extensive guide on how to run this game. I think that this is kind of the thing that's very intimidating for a lot of people. When you sit down to run like a sandbox setting and you're like, what do I do? Where do I put my players? There is actually already written a whole guide on how to like dangle plot hooks in front of them and like give them multiple options and let them pick. It's very much into like, I'm very much not into steamrolling my players into what I think they should do. I like to let them, you know, fail forward, if you will. And then if you're familiar with Pirate Borg, there is a page called The General History of the Dark Caribbean that ends in Armageddon. One of the things I have planned for this book is I'm going to be detailing these events and kind of giving you an idea on how to run them as they happen in your campaign. Like, for example, there's the 1715 Treasure Fleet shipwreck, which is a real thing in history. But in the Dark Caribbean, there'll be a page on like maps for that and like what the Spanish want and maybe what other factions want and how they're involved. And of course, it wouldn't be a pirate game, a pirate setting book without famous ships and famous crews. So Yes, we've got Blackbeard, of course, but also we have Queen Anne's Revenge and how the crew on board might operate. Okay, so the setting. Dark Caribbean, like I said, it's the default setting for Pirate Borg. It's Earth. It's not our Earth. Kind of one of those alternate timeline vibes. Has anybody here read On Stranger Tides? The book, not the movie. This book is a huge inspiration in that, like, basically on Stranger Tides, magic maybe worked in the old world, in like Greco-Roman times, but as industrialization happened and the presence of iron and metal became more present, it weakened magic and it stops working. But when the settlers discover the Caribbean, magic becomes more and more powerful and they start discovering these like cool ways to cast magic. Well, that's kind of like the vibe in Pirate Borg. But of course, it's dangerous. So if you cast a ritual and you fail, you very much might. Well, last night in my game, I was running the game and the guy who cast a ritual failed, and everybody was. What was he, Jason? It was floating in the air. All the gravity acted like it was water for 30 minutes or something. But it can be way worse than that, for sure. And then one of the big changes is that the history of the Dark Caribbean before Europeans show up is very different. And I'm going to have spoilers, so spoiler warning here if you're intent on playing and don't want to know what's going on here. Basically, you've got these indigenous populations that built up their civilizations more advanced than our timeline because of their access to magic. But then this, necrotic undead force starts to bubble up and it takes over. And we basically get like, maybe in the 1400s, 1300s, you get like a zombie movie. Imagine like full zombie movie. It's like, Mayans and Aztecs are combining their forces to build these giant walled cities. But then the Scourge, the name of the undead, they basically destroy the whole world. And what's left of the Mazones, they like kind of conglomerate into these walled off city states and they just stay there and they don't leave. And they build, almost like Wakanda style, like tech and whatnot. They build up in these like little bubbles. But then when the Europeans arrive, there's these temples that they've left behind and nothing else. There's no people. So it's a much different timeline than ours. It's a very, very rich setting for a role-playing game because you've got temples more than in our real life. You've got abandoned caves. And then after the Europeans arrive and they build up these massive cities because of all this treasure, guess who shows back up? Undead from the water. Yep. You've got pirates. You've got conquistadors that have risen from the dead. Of course, some Amazones as well. Man, I want to roll some dice at that. Oh yeah. So I talked about, you get a mass exodus from, Europe, where people kind of move into the Caribbean because, man, it's tropical. It's so pretty. I can't wait to like go get some treasure and get rich and then get stabbed by a skeleton. Those of you who are familiar with Pirate Borg know that there's a totally different vibe that happens when you start fighting the undead because some adventurous, probably pirate, who was shipwrecked with a dead man or something, decided to ingest the ground up remains of these skeletons. They leave behind this ectoplasmic dust that's called ash, which has a psychedelic and psychoactive properties. I describe it as like magic mushrooms meets Spice from Dune. Like this game can get wacky. It can get, off the wall. Like your character can make some really crazy decisions and fun things can happen. Well, when you put in this ectoplasmic dust called ash, all of a sudden the desire to flee the Dark Caribbean is replaced by like, there's money in that there dead skeleton and also drugs. So a content warning, I guess. Yeah. And this is one of the things I wanted to talk about today because when you're world building, when I was thinking about the world for this game and for this upcoming book, I was very like, well, why would they stay? Like, they need a reason to stay, and that's really where Ash came out of. I mean, like, yeah, it's fun and it can have, be a fun table to roll on, but really like you need a reason why they don't all just flee. Like if the undead are only in the Dark Caribbean, why would people stay in the Dark Caribbean? They could just go back to Europe where there are castles, Well, the reason is ash is because this becomes a commodity, and we're going to explore this a lot in this book, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a bit. But then, of course, because of the rising undead, all signs point to Armageddon. Those of you who have Pirate Borg know that the world ends, and you should cast your book into the sea after you complete your campaign. So behind the curtain, what's going on? This is kind of one of those things that like you don't really have to address in Pirate Borg, but I've thought a lot about over the years as I was been writing the setting. And of course, now that it's coming into actually being a real book, what's going on? Well, you've got the Netherworld, which is my like kind of catch-all term for all things afterlife, not all things purgatory, because that's an adventure that was just in this Kickstarter called Lost to the Locker. But the Netherworld, they want their dead back. They don't like that the universe is out of harmony by the undead escaping. But the dead don't want to leave. They want the bones of the living. So one of the main like motivating forces for the undead faction in this game is the undead feel compelled to return your bones, the bones of the living, back to the abyss, back to the dark Yucatan. You can kind of pick. It can be both. I have plans for making like different points, like different hot spots of what is like important to these skeletons. Of course, the Fountain of Youth will be one because it sounds like it's a good thing, but it's probably not because it gives you unnatural long life. We all know how that goes in fantasy games. So then, of course, in control of these skeletons, there are liches and necromancers that harness that power. Like I said, especially during the Abyss and parts of the Yucatan. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about my playtest campaign that I've been running. But yeah, I'm pretty excited for where this thing is headed. Okay, so let's talk about origins and inspirations. I feel like this is an essential part of any world building process. I'm sure you all have your own interests and desires. Mine are very steeped in horror, history, fantasy, and rum. Those are kind of like our taglines. The rum is a funny marketing thing, but also I have some points to make about that in a second. I want to talk about the history though. I feel like if you are doing any kind of world building and you're not paying attention to history, you're like leaving the best source on the table, even if you're going like high fantasy, because history has so many crazy things and they're like totally copyright free and they've been used forever. Like you can totally take anything from history and never get in trouble for it. You could even make an alternate history role-playing game and you're totally in the green, I guess, you know. That being said, I want to call out a few of like very specific things that have influenced the Dark Caribbean in case you're interested in my world in particular. Obviously, real life history. There's a book called The General History of Pirates. There's a great book called The Republic of Pirates. This is a great book just to read. You will read things in this book. You'll be like, oh, that's where they got that from movies. Like Pirates is such a rich, actually, I want to talk about this next book, Empire Blue Water. So Pirates, like the trope that we all know and love, we don't really realize it, you know, being alive in 2024. But the reason like Pirates of the Caribbean was such a big deal, the movie, is because this is such a good trope that it was already played out before most of us were born. The life of Henry Morgan, which is what Empire of Blue Water is mostly about. It is it is Captain Blood. If you've ever heard of the story Captain Blood, it is basically a fictionalized version of Henry Morgan's life. As an example, Henry Morgan led a raid on Maracaibo, which in the Dark Caribbean is a dungeon city, but in reality, it's kind of a small little port with it's around a big lake. And he led a raid down there and they got down there and there was like not a lot there. So they basically just like holed up and like poked the colonists until they gave them all their money. They would like colonists would bury their money when the pirates arrived and they would like, they didn't call themselves pirates. They called themselves buccaneers because they're doing this for the crown, right? After they'd been there for a few weeks, the Spanish show up like with 3 big warships and like Morgan is basically screwed. Their guys are going to die. They're like bottlenecked in this big lake. They can't really get out. I'm not making this up. This is literally what happened. The pirates like devised a system where like, hey, if we shuttle all our guys in rowboats to land, then the Spanish are going to think that we're attacking by land instead of by sea. So they would put guys in boats and row to land and then have the guys hide in the boats back. And they would like lie down in the boats and row back to their ships. And they did this like all day. So the Spanish thought they were going to attack. Then they built a fire ship and one of their ships was where they load it with explosives and gunpowder. And then they light a fuse and they send it out in the harbor. And then all of a sudden the Spanish are like, wait, what's going on? They're not attacking by land. And the fire ship explodes and blows up like 1 or 2 of the Spanish ships. And then Morgan and his men like drop their sails and sail out the front. Like this is a real story, you know. So the pirate thing alone is so like steeped in like swashbuckling tales that like you can just, even if you're making a full normal vanilla fantasy campaign, like reading these kinds of books are great inspiration for like raids and heists, that kind of thing. So definitely check out history. One thing I think that's really cool to do is to take from tropes or genres that aren't the one that you're writing for. If you're going to make, you know, medieval fantasy, you can totally look up, you know, Japanese military history from the 1800s. Like if you're able to find cool stories that are worth being written about to begin with, they're probably going to be fun in an RPG. I mentioned this a second ago, but fantasy, big inspiration for the Dark Caribbean is On Stranger Tides, especially the magic system. We all know Treasure Island. I also want to say Black Sails, which is basically like Game of Thrones, kind of, but pirates. It's actually a prequel to Treasure Island, but is a great show. Push past the first season. For lack of a better word, it's a little softcore to start. It's on one of those, but I promise you it's a good show. And then Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Oh my God, if you are into pirates and you haven't played any of the Black Flag or Assassin's Creed games are great for inspiration for RPGs. And then another one I want to call it is Pirates of the Spanish Main. This is a little punch-out pocket model game that came out, like 20 years ago now. I actually won a tournament playing this game at Gen Con, but the lore in it is actually pretty cool because you can play as like undead pirates and there's Spanish and French ships, And then, of course, Indiana Jones. We all know and love the temple crawling that is in Indiana Jones. Also, in the Dark Caribbean, big influence is horror for me, especially H.P. Lovecraft. There's a lot. Basically, anything that's in Call of Cthulhu or Shadow over Innsmouth, just dump it right in my setting. I'll eat it up. This isn't for everybody, but for me, I just love that idea that like, oh man, we read the thing. We read the page. Like, why do we read the page? Like, oh, now the monster's coming, and like, oh no, wait, I can control the monster. That's kind of the thing I go for in my games. Another big influence, Darkest Dungeon, especially from an art standpoint. This is basically a fantasy dungeon crawly type game, but you're not playing one hero or a group of heroes. You're playing like an entire roster. And a big element of this game is that you're acquiring negative quirks and you have to like train or beat the quirks out of your guys so that they'll go back into the dungeon. The art style too is a big influence, but if you're looking for inspirations for kind of your dark fantasy stuff, check out Darkest Dungeon. Of course, Dark Souls and Bloodborne, kind of some more grimdark stuff, and also Elden Ring. I want to specifically call Elden Ring because this game is very dark in nature, but also has these moments of like very beautiful landscapes. And that's kind of what I'm going for with Dark Caribbean, especially early campaign. You've got like bright, sunny shores and palm trees and rum and escapism, and slowly but surely the horrors of the reality seep in and ruin the world. Now, rum. First off, why is it always gone? I would like to know the answer to that. But really, I do actually think this is an influence for the game because it's important to remember that, especially with these darker genres, that you're there to have fun. Now, you don't actually have to be drinking rum, of course, or any alcohol at all. But the point is that like you are playing a game. When you're world building, you have to remember like no matter how excited you get, you're trying to provide a fun sandbox playground for your players or readers, if you're looking to publish, to play in. You have to remember that you are making this for somebody else. I think this really gets lost when you're world building, especially for new world builders. You're thinking, what do I want? Oh, I'm going to write 30 pages on the history of this wizard tower that my players are never going to discover. Well, you have to stop thinking like that and think about how are my players or my readers that are GMs going to interact with this content? How can they use it in their game? And really, most importantly, how can I get it out of my brain and into their brain? When you're writing a setting book, you really have to remember that your end user is the player, not the GM. Like you have to get it out of your brain onto the paper, into the GM's brain, out of their brain, into your player. So if you write, 8 million words in 2-column text with no indentation, guess what? You're not getting a lot of your information into anybody's head. And you'd be surprised how many books in that vendor hall do exactly that. And I'm like, no wonder nobody knows what's going on in the setting. So when I'm writing, I really try to write with tables. I really try to write with art. I said this a lot lately, but you're not selling a role-playing game. You're not selling a setting. You're selling a vibe. You're selling an experience for your GMs and for their players. I want to move on to other RPG inspirations for those of you who maybe are not as steeped into the OSR and our hobby as I am. There are some books that very much have changed my entire life, and I want you to know about them. The first one is The Dark of Hot Springs Island. This book is at 25 hexes on an island. They are 2-mile hexes, and it is very much, as Jacob describes, he's the writer, Jacob Hurst, a powder keg ready to explode. Your players are the matches. The idea is that there's all these factions. They all want different things. There are NPCs. They all want different things. And every location that you arrive at has a bell curve 3d6 table that you can roll on, like 3d6 table of what's happening. So the authors have written in of like normal vibe of this hex, or in this case, it's a dungeon, a cave where this giant boar is at. But this way, you as the GM know right away what is normal here, what might happen, or you can just not think about it it and roll and go with it. And they also have these encounter tables, which I really like. The idea is you roll 3d6 on both of those and you mash them two together. So you might get, let's see, you might get 1d6 boars resting, or sometimes you'll combine two results. So this is a really great way to impart a vibe of a setting, but do it quickly without, having to write 300 encounters. Like this thing can provide, this book could provide years of entertainment because it's so adaptable and can morph. Another one, and I actually discovered Dark of Hot Springs Island because of this book. This is Neverland by Andrew Kolb. Neverland, though, is a reimagining of Neverland, Peter Pan, except that Wendy is a witch and John is a lich and the natives have been replaced with Ents. And it is amazing sandbox driven. Another 25 hex crawl island where each hex has different things going on. Once again, world building through table design where you don't have to read all these tables to be able to run this adventure. So this is going to be one of the focuses moving into Dark Caribbean. Another big one to call out is Dolmenwood. I was actually mad when I got the PDFs for this because it's so damn good. Dolmenwood is written by Gavin Norman, who is the guy behind Old School Essentials. For those not familiar, Old School Essentials is a basically spiritual reimagining of basic expert D&D from 1981. And it's kind of like the foundation of the thing we call the OSR, or Old School Revival, or Old School Renaissance. But Dolmenwood is his own setting. It's very much like spooky woods. I think if I had to give you one pop title to imagine, I would probably say Pan's Labyrinth. But it gets darker than that, but also more medieval fantasy than that. Every town, every NPC is designed to have not an arc of what they do in your campaign or what they do in one location, but what do they want? What are they offering a reward for? What do they possess? What do they look like? That kind of thing. So here, once again, we're kind of building a cast and we're not writing a script. We're not writing a TV show. We're writing a place for our imaginations to explore and have fun. Another one of these, Yoon Suin. This book, they're about to ship the second edition on Kickstarter. Hopefully you can get it soon. It's kind of a very Asian-inspired setting. It takes place in this giant city called the Yellow City, and then you go out and explore. This one, at least the first edition is very low on art, but the entire book is written like this, where you have, multiple columns, and you can generate everything. No two Yoon Suins are the same. He says that on the first page. So as you run this game, you could run it 300 times and it'd be very different because the NPCs that you roll up and the encounters your players have are different every time. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to Mothership. Mothership is, I think, best in class as when it comes to layout and information design. They have this, kind of philosophy of the spread as a dashboard. So you open up the page and the thing that is in front of you is the tool you can use at the table. It's not a thing to read in your study with a little lamp and take notes on. You can do that, but you can also just pick it up and run. Here, for example, this is all 6 NPCs in Pound of Flesh, one of their better adventures. You can see that they all have a table, a D10 table for what are they doing now. You can see it says strike 1, strike 1, strike 2, unrest 2. In this book, there is a section on what happens if your players do nothing. And you've seen this in Pirate Borg. You will see it in Dark Caribbean. This is how I move plot forward in my games. Basically, there are these plot lines. And in this case, they are illustrating, hey, there are 3 plot lines. And if you're in phase 1 of the first plot line, which is called strike, this is what this guy's doing. In phase 2 of the strike, this guy's doing XYZ, that kind of thing. So this is a way to say like, hey, here's how I would move the plot forward in my setting if nothing happens. But that's the really important kicker there, is that you're saying if nothing happens. I think so many RPG books, you buy and then you expect, oh, they're going to do the dungeon. Well, like if they don't do the dungeon, well, then what? Well, the thing doesn't tell you. And this kind of more encourages that style of play. So any questions so far? Oh yeah. What's up? So for posterity, he's mentioning the flavor text on the back of the Pirates of the Spanish Main cards are great. Yes, they are very well done. Pirates with Ben, I think, is the guy who does all the archiving, and he still plays like daily. So you can definitely find inspiration. I mean, I'm kind of actually going to get to that a little bit in here in a second, stealing for ideas and inspiration from other games. Pirating, if you will. Okay, so finding inspiration for your setting. And I know some of this is obvious, but I just want, by me telling you, I'm giving you license to, go do it yourself, right? Use what you love. Like, people ask me a lot, like, why did you make Pirate Borg? Why did you make Dark Caribbean? Like what, like, you know, did you do market research? Like, fucking no, I did not do market research. This is the thing I think about all the time, and I wanted it to exist and I couldn't buy it. So you have to do the same. In my opinion, you have to do the same thing. Like you can't, if you don't have some, I mean, a quick aside, like I went to school for music. I really wanted to be a musician, composer. Fish is my favorite band of all time. And I found after several years that I don't really have anything I thought was unique to say in the music world. I just wanted to say what other people had already said. And I don't feel that way in RPGs. I would hope that you are doing the same thing. You can't just make an RPG setting because you want to make an RPG setting. It's got to be something that you love. That's my biggest thing. Also, if you don't, or if you can as well, use what you know. I know a lot about pirates now. I maybe didn't when I first started writing RPGs, but if you know a lot about medieval knights, or you know a lot about science fiction, you've read a lot of science fiction, that's a pretty good place to start because you've made yourself an authority on those kinds of topics. And if those don't work, or in conjunction, use what you would like to know more about. If you're going to write a setting, or you're going to write a setting book, you are going to spend a lot of time doing it. And man, I would really feel bad for you if you picked a setting that you didn't want to be in, or, you know, think about all the time. Back to the history topic. It's a very rich well of inspiration. You'll get ideas that you never would have come up with on your own, like the thing with Captain Morgan, but there's tons of that in history that's really, really incredible. And like I said earlier, concepts that you come up with from history will feel familiar, but their players they'll feel familiar and believable. But if you twist them into your setting, you know, like you could take a World War II battle, you know, and smash that into a caveman game. You know, if you can pull the politics of the tribes and, you know, and like instead of tanks, they have like boulder rocket launchers. I don't know. Ignore me on that one. The other one I want to talk about, though, is media. Obviously, we can all pull from video games. I think I mentioned this earlier, but video game strategy books are really, really great for this. I have an Assassin's Creed Black Flag strategy book, and like they have maps, and they have NPCs, and they have hooks. And it wasn't written for RPG. Now, I'm definitely not saying like don't take these words out, don't plagiarize it, but definitely use these things for inspiration. And then, of course, books and movie. The other one I wanted to talk about, I have made the grave mistake of starting to play Magic the Gathering again for the first time in 30 years. Yes, you can be sorry for me, but I've already spent your Kickstarter money. No, just kidding. But I will say the reason I started playing again is because, I don't know if you guys have been following Magic, but this set called Bloomborough came out, and it is like basically Redwall. It's like the cutest thing ever. And I was like, you know, my wife likes to play chess and I like theme. Like maybe I can get her to like learn the meta, you know? So like, but then as I'm playing the game, I'm immediately remembering why I why I quit playing card games and switched to role-playing games, because I really, really care about theme and I want to pretend to be in those worlds. But as I'm looking at the art in that game, I'm like, wow, this is such a great inspiration for my settings. And also in this process, I read this book called Marie Kondo's The Simple Art of Tidying Up or whatever, and I've gotten rid of a bunch of things, and I made the intense decision to let go of my Lord of the Rings living card game collection, which I have almost every expansion in the game. But as I'm going back through that, I'm like, you know, if I weren't writing a pirate game and I were writing a Tolkienist inspired, you know, setting book or adventure book, like the adventures in that game, a card game, are great inspiration. The art in that game, like I could just take those out and use them in a VTT like Roll20 or Foundry. So like, don't neglect these other games that you probably have in your house to draw inspiration from. One thing I always talk about too is my brother and I were playing Tomb of Annihilation several years ago. It's a 5th edition module. And we came up with this word Chulty because you're always in Chult, which is like this jungle, you know, dinosaur jungle. Ixalan is very Chulty, but like our wives know it because like, dude, let's eat at Dinosaur Cafe. It's like pretty Chulty, you know? So like when you're in a campaign setting writing mode, like all those things in your real life, like the toys that your kid buys, or like the thing that's on TV, or like that Magic the Gathering set that's been sitting on your shelf for 30 years, like can all of a sudden be a source of inspiration, if not even being used as a random generator, you know? Okay, so let's talk about Dark Caribbean design philosophy. I've kind of touched on these things already, but it's very important for this book to be easy to use, easy to run, easy to prep. This is surprisingly not a concern for most role-playing game designers, which I think is blasphemy. Like, the most important thing is, can the players use it? Can you get it out of your head into theirs? So that's the most important thing for me. No prep required. Yeah. Role building via tables. And then, yes, a dynamic world that lives and breathes aside from your players. And I have things in the Dark Caribbean that are like kind of timers that are going off, or that the plots will move forward. Like the idea that if you're at this one island and then you leave and then you come back, it should not be like an old video game where it's exactly the same and the NPCs say the same thing. It might not be there. It might be on fire. It might be controlled by a different faction. I cannot stress how much that feels like, wow, time is moving forward. My purgatory adventure in this last Kickstarter is called Lost to the Locker. There's a bunch of weird timetables in it where you can roll and eons might go by. And at the end, spoilers, when you come out, if you can escape the locker, you roll to see how long you were gone. When I ran it in my playtest campaign, we moved forward in time and we jumped a bunch of rungs on the Dark Caribbean timeline, and Nassau was destroyed. Havana had just had a huge fire. Like, building this kind of stuff into your campaign setting is a great way to make it feel like what your players are doing may matter, but it also is living without them. Another one that's big for me is emergent gameplay. This is the concept that the GM doesn't know it's going to happen, that you are going to kind of discover the events of the world together. So yeah, I embrace this, like I said, with a lot of tables, a lot of just kind of thinking about how it might work and then giving the tools for that to happen. But also, yes, that kicks into the choices matter and the clock is always ticking. When you're thinking about your design philosophy, like, I think it's important to think about these overall things that I've just outlined to you from my setting. What is important to you? Like, maybe you don't care about emergent gameplay. Maybe you want to do a linear track, or maybe you don't care about world building through tables, but you need to decide those things. And what I like to suggest is to come up with an elevator pitch so that you can always refer, like when you're in the weeds and you're lost in your setting and you don't know what to do next, or you like hate pirates because you've only made pirate stuff for the past 3 years. It's good to take a step back and be like, oh, this thing I'm working on right now, like this stupid table about what this like dumb NPC wants, like who cares? Refer back to your kind of, it's an elevator pitch, but it's also a mission statement. This isn't an elevator pitch to like sell it. It's an elevator pitch to keep you grounded in what you're doing. So I have some examples I've prepared. For me, Sea of Thieves meets Darkest Dungeon. That's a pretty solid one for what Pirate Borg and Dark Caribbean are. Or Pirates of the Caribbean meets Call of Cthulhu. That's pretty good too. You could also say like Game of Thrones meets Pirates of the Caribbean. It depends on what flavor you want to go. Army of Darkness meets Pirates of the Caribbean. Black Sails meets SpongeBob SquarePants, whatever. I got this one in here. Redwall and Mouse Guard meet Magic the Gathering. That's Bloomburrow. That's what I've been thinking about the past 2 weeks. But then, Peter Pan, but the kids never left, and they're now witches, liches, and monsters. Neverland. Game of Thrones level politics, but there's a unique magic system and alien race with their own magic. Stormlight Archives, right? Lord of the Rings, but you're a nobody, wraith-like undead searching for purpose. It's Dark Souls, right? So if you can think of that twist, maybe they can help you get there. Can also help you in brainstorming to come up with cool ideas. Okay, so I have a lot of slides. I'm trying to go quick. I've made more than I actually need, but I want to show you guys the fun stuff because I've been working on this game for a while. So let's show some stuff off. Everything in here is 100% temporary. Some of this stuff is barely started and some of it is totally done. So you'll get a mix. This is my faction chart. There are 5 major factions in the Dark Caribbean and then several minor factions. And then another set of like secondary factions, I guess. Like, for example, the Mazoans might be really important, but you have to find them first. Atlantis might be really important, but they don't go to the Devil's Triangle. They may never run into them, So, Brethren of the Coast, these are your fun-loving pirates. Everything you've imagined from Jack Sparrow to Captain Hook, they're all there. There are actually 12 major NPC captains in the game, and your players might end up working for any of them or killing all of them. Who knows? Depends on the kind of campaign. The English, of course, there's the British Empire, but then we have the kind of same vibe as the East India Company. We call it the West India Company because they're in the West. I'm not sure why it was called the East India Company. The West India Company is obsessed with ash. They have like secret I actually have a mission in this that I wrote based off of a Dark Forces mission. where you're actually sneaking into this ash production facility, and there are super soldiers there that have been made with the ash. They're also like packaging the ash to ship it back to Europe as cosmetics, because of course there are creams to make your skin seem younger. Guess what? If you use these creams, you're probably going to turn into a zombie eventually. Yeah. The French, they like to party. They like to have opulent times in their giant castle cities. But then underneath is the cesspool belly of the Assassin's Guild and all these kind of like covert networks. So there's always this like, it's very much like the real French timeline, but moved a little bit further back in history, and that revolution is coming. Hopefully it happens during your campaign, right? The Spanish, of course, we've got conquistadors moved up to our timeline. They're looking for the Fountain of Youth. We have the Inquisition. They're, of course, killing witches, but also they're killing pirates, anybody who doesn't believe what they believe. But then we also have the Wretched, and this is my very like Lovecraftian cult. They are very much hopeful to summon deep creatures from below and bring about the end of the world. They're all about the Necronomicon. Sub-factions. So I guess I was saying for your setting, when you're thinking about sub-factions, this is the idea of like, well, you know what? I don't need to fully flesh out like this one little order of knights or this one little tribe that lives in this one part of the jungle. But having it there, that could be a hook for my players. Maybe they'll go there and maybe you'll develop that. So when I'm thinking about sub-factions, I'm thinking like, this is a way to add flavor, but that doesn't mean that like, because I did 10 pages on faction A, that all 10 need 10 pages, So let's talk about evil forces. Now, I mean, this is an obvious part of any fantasy setting, are the bad guys. But in my setting, the bad guys come in the form of the Scourge. Now, of course, the Spanish could be bad guys. They could be good guys. The Wretched could be bad guys. They could be good guys. But, barring becoming undead, which is a possibility, the Scourge are probably the bad guys. So, the Nazgul, Saruman, these kinds of forces, the Nothing in the Never-Ending Story. These are like forces that you can't reason with. And it's kind of like this impending doom. This can be like a timeline pushing your campaign forward. I would hope that we all have a different way of approaching it. Like, let's not all do Sauron, but at the same time, there's a reason that like you can't go reason with him. It's a force that's moving the plot forward that you can't just like go roll like charisma checks to solve the problem. Another one for this is White Walkers in Game of Thrones. For me, it's the Scourge, right? All right, let's look at some assets. This is the Dark Caribbean map as it sits today. It's basically the same map that's in this book, but double the resolution. And then I'm going in and filling in all the places. The cool thing, though, is that I am getting crunchier in some ways. This is the end papers on the back. This is the water, like the maritime encounter chart. So if you're into hexes and rolling random encounters, this will let you know which encounter table to roll on. Right now, there are this many. I hope there won't be more because this is enough. But I really wanted to do that thing that Hot Springs Island does, which I build in the hard work for you. If they're in Black Coral Bay, they're in pirate waters. If they're in Petit Goave, they're in French waters. And that means you're more likely to run into French ships there. Now, of course, you could always run into the Kraken or a Ghost ship. These tables will be bell curve tables. But this lets me, as a game designer and a world builder, kind of define for you what the world is like by default. Hopefully you'll change it to fit your campaign needs. But the idea is that you bought my book. You don't have to do the work. I did it for you. This is a spread of reputations and reactions, which I've expanded from like the normal OSR 2d6 to it's 2d6 plus your reputation die. So you have a reputation die with different factions, different NPCs. I will actually track these on a little track so that players can see like, oh, we got a minus D4 with the Spanish because we blew up that ship. But Anne Bonnie, this one player's got a plus D6 with her. So anytime you have to make a reaction roll with her, she's much more willing to help you. This is a preview of the new Providence Island spread. This is what a lot of the island spreads look like, where I've got points on the island detailed with enough information to give you hooks, behind the scenes stuff for the GM, and then some random encounters. There's lots of these, like 50 of these in the book. The idea is you open up, where do you want to go? Boom, I roll the dice, you're there. Here's another one. This is Tortuga. Tortuga has a couple pages. You've got the general gist of the island with a timeline of what happens here if players do nothing. This part in green is talking about how the fort is haunted. This is the fort in the back. It's haunted by this ghost pirate named the Flail who eats hearts. If you follow the timeline as written, meaning your players don't deal with him appropriately, he will get dealt with via the timeline, that kind of thing. This is the details of the fort itself. And then here's one of the generators I was talking about. Now, one of the cool things about doing things this way is we really design things for VTT in mind as well. So each one of these buildings is an asset that you can drag and drop. So by the time I'm done with all of them, I think there'll be maybe over 100 buildings for you to drag and drop onto a scene. And then each one you can roll. This is the British one. So you could, roll for what's in the warehouse district or who's in the fort, that kind of thing. Let's talk about the cast. So the cast, interesting. NPCs are very, very important to me and to any good setting because I'm probably mentally ill a little bit. There are 54 in the Dark Caribbean. Yes, we're making a playing card deck of all of them. Each of them has a section for what they want. And I also have included a section on how to play them. I'm not sure this will be that popular. I have some people who don't really know movies. But for example, I wonder if I have any, I don't think I have any pulled up, but I'll describe play this character like Sirius Black from Harry Potter meets, somebody else. I'll put these little pop culture references in so that you don't have to think about how to compartmentalize them in your head. You can just read the thing and play them that way. Now, of course, please change them. Okay, so I think hopefully I can play this. Yeah, I've already drawn them all. So this is all of them. There's 6 from every major faction, 3 from the minor factions, and pirates get 12. Okay, so another thing that's good for campaign settings is catalysts. Catalysts really give movement and breadth, and that thing I'm talking about where it kind of lives on its own, but it also moves the plot forward. Someone was talking about the Legends of Dragonheim setting yesterday where, this meteor crashes and then it's got radioactive energy, but they can harness it for magic. It's that's a good catalyst. Mine is Ash. Ash is the thing that drives everything forward. It's why people come, but also those skeletons are coming to get your bones. They want your bones. So some quick ideas just for the kind of thing I'm talking about. These aren't very original. Magic doesn't work anymore, and now, or it hasn't worked in years, or it works for the first time in years, that kind of thing. Something somewhere or someone very important disappearing. I mean, there are whole books written on this kind of hook thing, but those are very important for you need an overall thing for your setting for it to make sense. This is the Wretched faction. One of the things I've done with this, we've got the Sunken one who's in this book. He's the leader of the cult, but each of the top leaders has a title of Tempest, and then they're named after a constellation. And all of the people in their little sect of the Wretched are in that constellation. So Tempest Hydra, he is in charge of the Hydra constellation, which is, maybe they are in Havana or they are over the southeast or something. Whereas Vela and Menkar, they're also stars, but those are stars of parts of constellations. So these are brethren and, brother and sister names given to these cult leaders when they join the cult. But this is the spread for the top Scourge leaders. The Flail is there over here on the right spread. This guy, Captain Morrow, he is this guy here on the front cover. I hesitate to point it out, but if you haven't run into him, he's Captain Jack Morrow. Right, that's the idea. He's basically the guy who really, really wants your bones. Now, I'm actually going to move this last guy to the end. This guy isn't part of the Scourge. He's from the Netherworld, and he wants the Scourge back. So when I was running my playtest campaign, we basically had a ultimate epic duel between Aeolix, this Mazoan lich, and Erebus, this kind of hell-fueled demonic monster with a sword. And the players were divided in 2 groups, and it was basically thousands of skeletons and this lich versus this flaming skull goat monster and a bunch of demons. And man, was it a great way to end a campaign. So of course we've got Admiral Morgan, who was discussing his real life counterpart, but now he has a skull flail. And then one of my favorites here is the Banshee of Avalon, which is the lady in the lake from King Arthur tales. Because of all the necrotic energy welling in the Dark Caribbean, she's come back to life, and she has a boat full of whites from the whites of the Round Table. Okay, so I want to finally talk about tools for the job for those of you who are maybe just now getting into this. I write everything after years of trying different software. I use Obsidian. I listen to a lot of the Cortex podcast, which is kind of a productivity podcast. And Obsidian is basically a markdown writing tool that you can sync to the cloud. So you, as a layout guy and an artist, if I can do layout, I do, and Obsidian doesn't let me. So that's why I use it. I cannot start making, I mean, you can make tables, but you can't do like different fonts and stuff. So a lot of other people, I didn't even look it up. There's another one that Sly Flourish uses. I can't remember what it's called though. Anybody know? It's like the same kind of tool. There are lots of these out there for writing. I used to use OneNote, but it's really good to have somewhere to just dump your words, categorize them, tag them, link them together. Obsidian also has a really cool, it's like a whiteboard thing where you can take notes and drag them onto a board and connect them. They don't have to be notes. They could be pictures or they could be shapes, but it's great for like putting all your NPCs and drawing their connections together. Legend Keeper has been really clutch. I don't use it so much for writing, but it's really great for it's very map driven world building tool where you can drop pins on a map and then put NPCs in those pins and link them all together. It's basically World Anvil, but way better. We also use it for our online West Marches campaign, which just finished, and we'll be doing it again next year. And then I actually will write and illustrate and lay out at the same time. And I do that in InDesign. InDesign is not cheap. I think it's $30 a month to get to that level of Adobe subscription. So if that's probably not in your budget, because it was not in mine until I started making this book, and even then it was a lot. Affinity Publisher is a good alternative. That's if you're going to do the layout yourselves, which you do not have to do, but I write my books in layout. So World Anvil is like old tech and Legend Keeper is new tech. It's like very, I don't know what you would say now, but like Web 3.0. The question was, why do I like World Anvil or Legend Keeper over World Anvil? Just a really great set of tools, really good information design, and it's very map focused. You're still building your own wiki though, It does have a lot of features, but not in the way that World Anvil does. It's much more streamlined. It feels like more like Discord, maybe Discord a couple years ago, where it's like clean and there's tagging and there's hashtags. Gets out of the way, yeah. And the biggest thing is it's very map driven. You can load in a huge map and put pins all over it. Like in our world building or Dark Caribbean one, you've got the whole Dark Caribbean, and then you can go to Nassau or New Providence Island. You have all of New Providence, and then you can go into Nassau Town, and you've got all of the Nassau Town map, and then you can go into the Green Kraken Tavern and have the whole tavern, and then you can link between all those, yeah. And then, of course, Google Docs. I actually still use Google Docs, especially if I need to get something out and have an editor look at it or collaborate or have someone give me notes. It's still a great tool. Okay, books that I want to recommend. These are mostly RPG books. Worlds Without Number. Also, if you're into sci-fi, Stars Without Number. If you're into cyberpunk, Cities Without Number. Kevin Crawford is amazing in his books. I use World Without Number all the time to come up with interesting ideas. I don't rip them straight out, but they're great jumping off points. They can help you build your whole campaign. I mean, honestly, if I were recommending one book, that would be the one I would say you should get. You can write your whole campaign just from Worlds Without Number. Tome of Adventure Design. This one is a little bit more of like a springboard. It's a little less focused and a little bit more like, here's all the things you might see in a dungeon. Here's all the things you might see in a room. But it has also really cool, the second edition has cool columns, like little borders on the sides of each page that are just like random words. It'll be like shadow or like ruby of death, just random ideas to like get your brain going. And then Skirple's Monster Overhaul. This is an OSR bestiary. It's basically like a rewriting of the 5th edition monster manual, but in OSR style, where it gives you motivations for these monsters, even sample layers. Like, for example, the vampire one has a vampire manor, that kind of thing. And then finishing up here, tips and tricks. Okay, this is kind of what I was talking about. Oh, no, this is a new idea. I have a stack of playing cards I bought. I actually got them at CVS. They're just, $2 a pack. And I wrote all my NPCs' names on a different card and all the locations. And can use that to like draw like a random table or like lay them out. If you're trying to like brainstorm or think about connections, you can open a spreadsheet and like make all the hearts are like, I think hearts are Spanish in my setting, and the clubs are pirates, mostly. But then it's cool to like group them together and think about relationships. And you can kind of do that same thing with tarot cards, especially if you get a themed tarot card deck that maybe matches your setting. Polling them you can stitch together like who, what, where, and why, and read those cards to kind of like get your brain going. You'd be surprised how quickly that'll get you going in the right direction. And then, like I was saying earlier, CCGs, LCGs, the art alone, like if you have a setting that you're into, if you're running a kind of samurai Asian setting, go look up all the art for Legends of the Five Rings. There's so much art there. Like, you're not going to put that art in your game, but man, could it give you good ideas. Okay, cool. Well, that's pretty much all the things I wanted to cover. I had to go quicker than I thought. Are there any questions? You guys have anything? I mean, I'm happy to take any like tips questions or questions about Dark Caribbean specifically, that kind of thing.
How much do you offload?
Oh, you mean to other people? Nothing. I don't offload anything. I can't do that. I mean, creatively, I can't do that. But I understand that not everybody is a writer and an artist. So I guess offload what you have to, I mean, there's a lot of great RPG, but I think Dark Hot Springs Island is a great example. Jacob's a better writer than I am, and Gabriel Hernandez, the artist, is a better artist than I am. And I think the two of them combined makes a really incredible book. But in my life, I've found it hard to find people who I can trust to get my thing out, but I guess just get who you have to, I'm thinking for me, it's there's only one way, and it's you have to invest as much time as it takes. I know that's a dumb answer, but you just got to keep going. I think one thing I will say when I'm thinking about drawing or being creative, that is my job. I get paid to do that. Limithron we have 3 full-time people now. I could spend all my day working on marketing and managing and trying to think about how to make the website better. But anybody can do that. Those things can be hired. I'm the guy who makes all the creative. So sometimes I have to be oh, I shouldn't feel guilty for sitting around and for drawing all day. That's literally what pays the bills for us, So when you're making a setting, you have to remember, sometimes you have to take a break and go play a video game to get inspiration, or you have to go read a book. Reading is actually a part of my work schedule. Digesting other RPGs is part of my work schedule. Drawing from life or drawing studies is part of my schedule. And those things, they have to be, because I know they will pay dividends down the road. Yeah. What was the question in the back?
Oh, I was going to say, have you ever seen that meme where it's if you get the time right, you can get a party of a samurai?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing, it's pirates, samurais, and cowboys.
And a cowboy and a Victorian.
Yeah. First off, I'm going to say that the era of piracy that you're talking about is not the real one. You want to be in 1715. That's where the good time is. Okay, let's be clear.
The thing that it got me thinking of was just the things, we kind of put history into boxes, but Journey to the West was written at the same time as Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Shakespeare is alive during the time of piracy.
Yeah, sure.
And you can have some weird stuff happening.
Yeah, and Cleopatra was alive closer to now than the time of the pyramids. Yeah, so there's witch trial in the new book, and there's a bunch of witch trial. Salem is walking distance from Innsmouth if you really want to get into it. So I've got the Deep One pirate fell in love with the witch got killed, the Deep One pirate is on a rampage, that kind of vibe. So I guess the thing for me is I don't really care about cowboys. No offense to anybody who is. I try to play Red Dead Redemption. I can't get into it. It's just not my vibe. But I read most of Shogun way before the TV show came out. Not in the Dark Caribbean, but in my first campaign setting, the Tales of the Caribbean. Panama was called New Shanghai, and there was the Jade Rebellion. You can totally mix those. Shogun, a bunch of pirates basically crash land in Japan, feudal Japan. You could totally mix those. Yeah.
You mentioned, if it's not too long of a story, that pirate board was kind of an accident.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess real quickly, during COVID, I started drawing. I started my Patreon making pirate ship maps. And I was getting burned out because I was drawing all day, every day, and having to prep a campaign. And all my players were GMs. So we took a break, and one of my friends ran Morkborg for us. And it was the most fun we'd ever had playing a role-playing game. Because we went from thinking about subclasses and thinking about counting spaces and all these really crunchy little bits to oh my God, he just cast a spell and 2 of my stats flipped. And I have 3 hit points, but we killed that guy because I set something on fire and threw it on his head, which isn't in the rules. We just laughed a lot. And Morkborg has a fully open license. So I was dude, I'm gonna make Pirate Borg. I'm gonna hack it. It's better for what I want to do anyway. And I did that, and it was all bright yellow, and then it just didn't match my maps, so I redid it. And then I went from being oh, I'm making a Morkborg hack to oh, I'm making a game. I didn't really knew I was going to make a game, but by the time I was done, by the time I went to Kickstarter, we ended up, I think it was 10,000% funded or something. And I was oh, well, now people are going to play this. I got to make it even better, and hit all the stretch goals. And then Free League signed it. And I was I now really got to make it good, and then it was just oh wait, now this is what people know me for, instead of the always planning on making the Dark Caribbean, Anything else? Yeah.
What do you think about AI?
Oh man, we could have a whole other panel on that. So I'll be very transparent. I do use ChatGPT, but I do not use it like you think. ChatGPT is basically like a for real thesaurus, where I can say like, hey, I need this word, but in this context. Or like, I need an item that would exist in this time period. I use it for that. But I have pretty strong feelings about it on the visual side because it's a much different thing. You're not taking like, hey, like go look up the thing I need you to look up that I can't look up because Google's not good at asking questions. It's good at like looking up articles. Like I don't want to read 10 Reddit threads about what word is better. I want to tell the thing, and it's so good at that. You'd be amazed. Or like, have you seen the trailer for Down Among the Dead? So I made a trailer for this Kickstarter we just had, and I made that in this program called Blender, and it's a 3D animation program. And like, I don't know how to use it, and every time I hit a problem, I don't Google it. I ask ChatGPT, and it tells me exactly what to do. So I learned how to use that program. AI is the future. It's coming. We can't stop it, no matter what you do. But when people like make all their art, like there's a vendor down in the hallway that has all their art is AI, and like makes me sick. Like when I look at it, I just like, there's something wrong with that. That we're like, I feel like we're losing our spirit. You have to understand that like the history of specifically Midjourney and DALL-E up till now is like they're basically using the algorithm to go crawl all other art. And then people are no longer like hiring artists to do the thing because the machine can just steal their style. I mean, you're welcome to use it in your game. I don't use it in mine. I just don't like how it looks. Like even when it is copying the guy I like, I just rather, I don't know, man. It's like, it's one of those things. I feel like the more people learn about what's actually going on, the less okay they feel about it, but you kind of have to like pry past the first layer, that's my opinion. So, okay, cool. Well, thanks for coming, guys. Yeah.
You've been listening to the Ship of the Dead podcast. Email your questions, comments, and buried treasure tips to shipofthedead@limithron.com. You can support the program, join our Discord server, get early access to new episodes, and instantly download hundreds of battle maps, assets, and adventures at limithron.com/Patreon. Tiers start as low as $2 a release, and you only get charged when I make something new. Pirateborg, my rules-light, rum-infested hack of Morkborg, is available now at pirateborg.com and retail stores everywhere. Ship of the Dead is produced by Limithron LLC, our audio editor is Matt Kepler, and our music is by Alexander Miller. For more, head to limithron.com.